It's Sunday, April 17, 2022. Welcome to the 10th episode in this series from Midas Touch and 5-Minute News called The Weekend Show. Download the show as audio in addition to my daily 5-Minute News podcast on our iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Joining me today is political strategist, writer and former Republican Cheri Jacobus. Cheri, thank you for joining us here.
Thank you for having me.
Lots to talk about. Not at all. The three stories that we're going to look at this week are the Conservatives attacking White House's Putin price hike narrative as inflation is on the rise. We're also going to look at the climate breakdown threatening many of our favorite foods. And finally, and tragically, another police shooting, this time of Patrick Loyola, a 26-year-old in Grand Rapids. So lots to think about here. Let's look at this story, first of all, about gas prices, because this is something that is really very frustrating for Americans, isn't it? You know, the cost of living is one thing, but the cost of gas has always been something that Americans have enjoyed. Cheap gas since forever, right? And suddenly to see it go from $2 to $5 or $6, that's something that is doesn't come very naturally to Americans. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, and certainly where I'm from, it's always been expensive to get gas. It's just always been cheap here in America. So what do you feel about Joe Biden blaming Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine for this price rise at the pump? As we know, consumer prices have jumped 8.5% since March last year.
Well, the rise in gas prices is because of Putin invading Ukraine and the chaos that he's caused. The problem is that most Americans don't understand that. You know, we have presidents that unfortunately like to take credit when gas prices drop, and then they get the blame when gas prices rise, and presidents don't determine what gas prices are. And you are correct that Americans are a bit spoiled with having lower gas prices generally than the rest of the world. But it's a psychological issue too. You know, the price of gas for an average person or average family, they know that it fluctuates. It's also not anywhere near one of their biggest purchasing items over the course of any given month. However, every time you drive by a gas station, what do you see? You see those changing numbers, you know, and the psychological impact of it going from $3.99 per gallon to $4, just that 1 penny difference, the 3 versus the 4, has a huge psychological impact on folks. But again, I think a lot of that is because it's an expenditure we do regularly. It is something, again, how many gas stations do you drive by in the average day? It's a constant reminder. When they add on an extra little fee or tax to your phone bill, most people don't even notice it, or to your cable bill, they sort of stick it in there, and you're on auto pay, or you write the check, you go online and pay your bills, and you're paying this extra money and you don't even realize it because you're not driving by a big poster of your changing phone bill on a regular basis.
But, I mean, is it fair to say that the war in Ukraine is the sole reason for the hike in prices? Because, you know, gas is a commodity, oil is a commodity. It rises and falls as world events affect the prices, as we know. I mean, someone is making a lot of profit here. And would it not be better to go to the refineries and say, well, maybe you need to make a little less profit for a while? I mean, is that not
Yes.
the problem with capitalism and a free market? Is that the prices might be going up for consumers, but the profit is also going up for these oil companies.
Yeah, they're taking advantage of the situation, and we're paying the price. There's no question about that. They're taking advantage of the war. They're taking advantage of all of it. This isn't just capitalism. This is capitalism on steroids. This is one of those things that gives capitalism a really bad name. And there's been a lot lately, enough to change people's minds, from the Reagan years, certainly. But you're absolutely correct. These are, the energy companies, the oil executives, seeing an opportunity to gouge us even more. And I don't know who makes that phone call? The president? And if the president were to call them and say, hey, could you guys maybe ratchet down on the profits? Who's to say he hasn't made a call like that? But is that really all it takes? Or is there
But
some
but
sort
there
of a
is a
tit
there
for
is
tat?
a
Yeah. I mean,
th-
it's a
there
little more complicated than that, but you're absolutely right. You are
yeah.
absolutely dead on 100% correct on that. It's greed.
And we don't get, I mean, America doesn't get much of its oil from Russia, a very small percentage. I think it's, our total imports of oil are around 20%, and of that, 8% is from Russia. So, we are capable of being oil independent. We don't need Russia's fuel necessarily. So how do they connect this to, how is it fair that they connect this to Ukraine? Because a lot of the prominent Republicans, Nikki Haley, for example, tweeted the other day, you're going to hear a lot about Putin's price hike. Food and gas prices were already soaring. Wages can't keep up with inflation. This is Biden's economy. Is that fair?
Well, it's fair that anytime anybody's in the White House, it is their economy, and they do have to deal with the various factors that influence that. And yes, the war, Putin's war, does in fact influence it. It's not just happening there; it's something that affects everything globally, along with a lot of other factors. We also have Republicans. In Texas, the governor there, Republican governor, is purposely stopping a bunch of tractors so that they can't move forward and deliver the food. And it's costing those drivers and their companies money. So you have Republicans not just messaging this in a way to, quote, blame Biden, but they're trying to make it worse. You have Republican governors literally holding these truckers hostage, literally trying to make it as rough on Americans as possible so that we then blame Biden. And, I don't think that that's gotten enough press attention. But the president is doing what the president needs to do. Is he to blame? No, he's not to blame. Is it his problem to address? Yes. Do you have Republicans out there trying to make it worse in a way that hurts all Americans? You bet.
Why do they do that, Cheri? I mean, this is what's so interesting to me, because it's like they would rather...
You must be new here.
Well, I am new here, but this is I'm like 5 years in, so I'm doing my best. But what I find interesting is that to the detriment of their own environment, to the detriment of their own gas prices, to the detriment of their own food prices, Republicans would rather criticize the opposition and put out all of this rhetoric, whether it's true or not, but they just like to own the libs, right? But they're not going to benefit if they do that. I mean, surely there are some issues where we would all benefit because we all use gas. I mean, are they just shooting themselves in the foot?
First and foremost, what they want to do is destroy Democrats, destroy this president, no matter what. I am a former Republican. I don't recognize my former party, but I do recognize some of the players. And I know how brutal this is. Once they crossed that divide where they were going to go into Trumpism, once they made that decision, once they sold their souls, all bets are off. But they will do anything, and I mean anything, to destroy this president, to destroy Democrats. And part and parcel of that is, yes, to hurt Americans, to hurt their own constituents, to create and exacerbate these problems rather than do their part to help them. And you said blaming Democrats, blaming the libs is one thing. They're going further. They're doing everything they can to hurt Americans so that it then hurts this president and his party. And that's where, that's just downright evil.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he blamed inflation on federal policies of borrowing and printing money at unfathomable levels and bad energy policy. We could get into the weeds of that, but, the governor of Florida has taken much of this, infrastructure money from the previous bill and is happily spending it in Florida and taking the credit for it. At the same time as this week, he redrew a boundary map to ignore a large swathe of an African-American community in Florida so that Republicans could win there and actually pushed against the court, which initially said he couldn't do it. And now, for some strange reason, they're saying, oh, actually, you can because you're the governor. I mean, this kind of totalitarian attitude from a lot of these Republican governors, we're seeing a lot from Greg Abbott in Texas at the moment as he's busing people to D.C., migrants crossing the border there. and trying to make it look like he's the strong man. This is actually a voluntary scheme that he's doing. He's not kidnapping people. He's saying, if you want to go to D.C., I'll pay for you to go there. But the media, the right-wing media, and his office have made it look like this is his kind of, strongman attitude. So what is it with these guys? I mean, is there a longer-term strategy for them? Is it the case that they enjoy a story like inflation being high? Does that give them ammunition? Does it give them an opportunity to kind of make headlines? Is DeSantis does he want to run for president? I mean, what's behind all of this?
Yes, I think Ron DeSantis definitely wants to run for president, and he is. He can't be on a ticket with Trump because they're both from the same state now. That since Trump, made his residence officially Florida, so I think that he's looking to be the alternative to Trump should something happen to Trump. Should he be indicted, can't run? Should his dementia get worse? Should his horrible living habits finally catch up with him and he dies? Anything that can happen.
That sounds like a wish list from you, Cheri.
Yeah, as I say, we can go through a long wish list of what we'd like to happen to Donald Trump. I think that the reason, if Trump doesn't run, the reason will be because he thinks he can't win. It will be because of that. So I think you've got Ron DeSantis mimicking Trump. He's sort of basically Trump with a brain. And that's even frightening because he's locking in on these nutcase, idiot, moronic Trump Republicans, uneducated, stupid people who believe what Fox News tells them, who believes what Trump tells them, even when you prove to them, that they're wrong. And so he's telling them, he's probably amazed at how easy it is to fool these people. So what he's doing now is basically a little song and dance for big donors to show them that he can control the unwashed masses, the stupid people who, the low information voters. So he's sort of showing off for donors now. And then you've got Mike Pence, who recently gave a speech to big donors, and he's trying to be the reasonable alternative should Trump fail. But they may want him to fail if he completely goes down. So they need somebody to bridge that gap between establishment people, which some of them might be the big donors, and the unwashed, stupid masses, the ones that go to the rallies and who DeSantis is trying to gather together as his own. You see Ted Cruz desperately trying to get that group too. There's a reason why Trump said he loves the poorly educated or the uneducated. So if you can show that you can get the people who go to the rallies, the idiots, to the donors, then the donors will follow suit because the big donors don't have ethics. They don't have morals. They want to go with who can win. We know that some of them are frustrated with Trump. This is just the Trump era of Trump is pretty difficult for them. They'd like things to be more sane, but they're going to go with who they think can win. And so this is the back and forth you have. And you've got, Nikki Haley just trying to be anybody's vice president.
Is it fair to say that, 70 odd million people that voted for Trump are they all idiots? I mean, the people that go to the rallies, I understand. We see a lot of interviews now at the rallies, and some of the answers that people give to journalists' questions are brilliant. I mean, they're just hilarious.
You can't make this stuff up, right?
You can't make the stuff up. And I understand that in any country, there's going to be a group of people that fit into a category where they're very happy to be led and follow a cult. And I get that, and that's fine. But I also respect the fact that whilst not everybody is smart, not everybody is educated, I do believe that people have instinct. And I believe that people have the capacity to listen and to make sense of a scenario. And, the majority of people that voted for Trump were unhappy with the status quo, didn't trust Hillary Clinton. They bought into, or the idea of another Clinton dynasty. And they their vote for Trump initially was a protest against the establishment because he presented himself as an anti-establishment character. Of course, he wasn't. These were the people that he hung out with. But I mean, is it fair to dismiss all of these Trump voters because they are still Americans and they still have parents and children and lives and jobs. And, they do need support. And arguably, they're voting for the wrong party.
Well, the first part of your question, you said, are they all these sort of the idiots, and all 70 million of them? The answer, of course, is no. You have people who think they're well informed, but here's something that's very, very dangerous that's happened in our country, and that's Fox News. Fox News has changed. I used to be on Fox News. Over the course of 18 years, I was on all three: MSNBC, Fox, CNN, a couple thousand times. I was at Fox a lot. So that's the world that I'm coming from. They changed. And I would even kind of warn my parents, be a little bit careful here, and I was on the network. They wouldn't have me on as much because I guess I was a rhino, or not easy to manipulate, wouldn't say what they wanted me to say. I was not a paid contributor. I was just on several times a week. So once you get people to believe that everybody else is lying to you, don't watch CNN, don't watch MSNBC, only watch Fox, because we are the only ones telling you what you need to hear. And then you have all of these other, media around them. You've got Breitbart, you've got, Judicial Watch, you've got all this right-wing stuff posing as actual newspapers, especially for older people who aren't on Twitter, may not be online or on Facebook at all. We're talking about these information silos. So you have reasonable people who may be educated, who think they're informed. But if you were to compare Fox all one day to the other networks, for example, I have a relative who is a Fox News addict who doesn't know who Mark Meadows is, but is very concerned about, Hunter Biden's, what's going to happen to him? He's a real bad guy. He's going to get caught, and that sort of thing. But Fox News is simply not reporting the voter fraud that Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff and former congressman, his wife, voter fraud. This person doesn't know, as Fox viewers don't, that Donald Trump Jr. Has all of these texts to Mark Meadows when he was chief of staff. And this was 2 days after the election, when the votes still weren't even counted. And here's the president's son saying, here's our plan to steal the election. And Fox News viewers hear nothing of this. They don't know anything about Ginny Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, sending these texts to Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, on January 6th, about what we're doing, and God is with us, and all of this weird stuff. So you can have people who are smart enough to want to stay informed, but they're in an information silo, and unless you can reach them in those vehicles that where they get their information, they're never going to know any of this. So they're different from the people who go to the rallies. And that's what I think is very, very unique and dangerous in the era of Trump, is this sort of, I don't listen to anybody else. Everybody else is lying to me. So I can only watch these people who are telling me the truth. And they get misinformation, out and out lies, as we know, certainly in the case of Tucker Carlson. And then important information, and lots of it, is completely kept away from them. They're in a vacuum. So I think that explains a lot of the Trump voters, and it's the only way that Trump and Trumpism and the GOP can keep these people. You can't present them with all the information and just make a better case. They are absolutely keeping them in an information vacuum.
And this isn't exclusive to the United States, because, of course, we're seeing this in Russia right now, aren't we? We're seeing it with Russian people thinking that the Ukrainians are the Nazis, and that Russia is doing an important job of going in there and eradicating this extremism, which, of course, those of us who have access to the free press know that it's quite the reverse. So we know it happens in other countries, but the tragedy of it happening in America, where you would think that we are, a free country, well, clearly we're not free, because there's information warfare, and people, as you say, are living in a bubble of their echo chamber of news. So therefore, that suggests that America is not a free country, because that's locked down. We have Republicans, this week, Oklahoma and Florida and Texas and Arizona banning abortion. And, in the case of Oklahoma, banning it and making it illegal, like you'll go to prison if you perform an abortion. So that also suggests it's not a free country. And then finally, of course, we have the vote. We have what used to be the free democratic right to a fair and free vote. Well, that now has been diminished. Even though voting is fair, there's a whole movement, as you describe, of people, including the former president and all of his surrogates, who claim that all elections in America are in some way fraudulent. But at the same time, it's those very Republicans who are currently redrawing boundary lines, gerrymandering, and, changing people's vote rigging the election. So America is not a free country anymore, is it, Cheri? I mean, it's no different here to Russia.
I think that we've crossed the divide. I think we're further along going down the drain than people realize. And, we saw this during the pandemic when a lot of people wanted to vote by mail. And I firmly believe that Putin did cheat for Trump in 2016. And, we know this because Manafort was getting the Russians through Kalimnik. He was getting Putin internal polling data from the campaign. That is collusion. And then on election night, this is important. So by this time, they already knew where to go. They kind of had it set up, what they needed to do, because we have the Electoral College, so it's easier to do this. On election night at 5:00, there's a media consortium that gets exit polling. It is very secret, and the different major media get together, and they have exit polling, and they know who's won by that time. And it is to be kept secret. The polls are still open. At 5:01, Chris Vlasto of ABC News made a call to his good buddy, the deputy campaign manager of the Trump campaign, Dave Bossie, and told him, you guys are in for a rough night. Here's where you're losing. And that information got spread to Reince Priebus, Manafort. The Trump at that point apparently turned and looked at Melania and said, we lost. And they knew by that time it was that bad. And the media knew, which explains later the shocked faces. That was at 5:01 while the polls were still open. Suddenly, something happened in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And just the right combination of votes, a couple per precinct, if that, in those states are what gave Trump the Electoral College, even though he had lost the popular vote by 3 million votes, which was consistent with polling when polling closed a little bit, got a little bit tighter at the end. So those 77,000 votes spread between just those three states are what gave Trump the Electoral College win. And all of that happened after they had that exit polling showing that Trump had lost and where he was losing and where he was losing. So you bet they got that stuff to Putin and they had this set up. There is, infamously, there is a whistleblower who alleges that Karl Rove once told her that if a state is within 3%, 3 percentage points, in the polling, you can cheat undetected with machines. Again, all you have to do is one per precinct, that you can do it very, and so this is what's happened. So what happened this year? We had a pandemic, or last year we had a pandemic, 2020, and people wanted to vote by mail. Well, you know what that is? It's a paper ballot. You can't cheat as easily with a paper ballot. Can't do it.
And voting by mail is normal around the rest of the world.
It's normal.
It's not considered to be anything out of the ordinary. That's how you vote.
But look what they did. They panicked and they started first of all, they were shutting down polling places in black neighborhoods to make it harder so people had to stand in line. In some places they made it illegal now to give them water for people standing in line. They're doing everything they can to make it harder to vote in those neighborhoods, in those areas, in those precincts that will be a heavily black or Democratic vote, because black Americans obviously vote heavily Democratic. Then we have them. It got so bad for Trump. They panicked so badly. He had installed Louis DeJoy as head of the post office, postmaster general, and they panicked so much because they absolutely had to stop these paper ballots. They had to do it because since 2016, everybody knew what they were up to, and the machine voting got tighter. The security on it. So you can't do it as easily. So they're in a little bit of a tight spot here, and they needed more because it really was a blowout because there was a landslide coming. It was coming to be a landslide victory for Biden. So what did they do? They literally, because they couldn't even hide it, they had mailboxes pulled out of the ground in neighborhoods so that people could not just go and drop their ballot in the mailbox. Then they got to the point they panicked so much where Louis DeJoy was ordering, for no reason at all, the dismantling and destruction of these mail sorting machines that cost $2 million each right before the election, so that you couldn't sort the mail.
We heard about this. Yeah, post office workers were photographing equipment that had been left out in the trash that was perfectly serviceable. So let me ask you a question.
So no, we don't have free elections. That's what I'm saying.
And I appreciate the explanation. But I mean, we knew that from the Mueller report that was, very clear about Russian collusion. The Steele dossier turned out to be in pretty much entirely true. But all of these things were used by Trump to kind of project the very opposite, which is that, by saying Russia 3 times, Russia, 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 he created a trope that got repeated and repeated that suggested that he was actually anything but a Russian operative. But, we're now seeing...
Democrats helped with that too, though. You know that. With the Democrats, right. What Bill Barr did, he came up and he said, Mueller report exonerates Trump, which is false, but Americans aren't reading the Mueller report. And right. Mueller even said, he was asked, can the president be indicted, essentially for these 10 counts of obstruction of justice outlined in the Mueller report? Can he be indicted upon leaving office? And he said, yes. And so that hasn't happened.
And that was a circus surrounding that, wasn't it? Bill Barr doing that press conference was a very strategic way, as you say, to communicate to the American people, and in the same way as them see the people that don't pay attention, right? And so,
and also remember, Democrats decided not to impeach. Nancy Pelosi said he's not worth it, so they let us down.
That's very interesting. And
Trump became emboldened.
But I'm really interested to know, from your opinion as a former Republican, and you have insight that I simply don't have, why so desperate to win? What is so important about winning, especially if you come to the table with no policies, you just want to reverse everything that Obama had done. All of these reversals is basically what you do. Conserving, smaller government, do less, more freedom. Ironically, that doesn't really work today, seeing as that, you can't have an abortion or trans people can't take part in sports. I mean, these seem like rules to me. They don't seem like freedoms. But anyway, why are they so desperate to win at whatever cost, even if it means having to rig the election to commit treason against the United States?
Well, I learned something about former colleagues in my former party, which is why I left the party. I left the GOP as soon as they nominated Trump. I didn't wait. Everybody thought he would lose to Hillary, but I knew that a lot of people waited to leave. They thought, well, they'll lose and we'll all join together. I was done. And what I realized was the establishment was not for Trump. Putin was. There were these other forces. And this meant the lobbyists, the TV people, the Washington people, the political class miscalculated the relationship that Trump had in New York with TV executives and with Murdoch, with Roger Ailes, who ran Fox News, with Jeff Zucker, who just left CNN. Jeff Zucker, when he was at NBC, greenlit The Apprentice for Trump and made him a star. And he handed the reins of CNN to Trump during the primary. Basically, and got rid of, banned anybody who said whoever Trump wanted banned and hired people Trump wanted hired. That was a very big deal. But Washington, the establishment people who thought they were in charge were not for Trump. So all of a sudden he becomes the nominee because of the media, because of Putin, because of the collusion, all of that, becomes the nominee, and they all got in line, except very few of us. You know why? Not because, we care so much about this issue or that issue. They wanted to keep their lobbying contracts, their lucrative gigs. They wanted to remain in office. They wanted to keep their TV gigs. They wanted to still be a part of that Washington life and lifestyle that I was a part of for 30 years, by the way. And that's what was important to them. We're going to pretend that even though we don't really like Trump, we're going to pretend that he's just like any other Republican nominee or any other Republican president. And little by little, they all became criminals themselves, unethical. I mean, I saw this happen. So to your point, do they, to win at any cost? Sometimes it's just about the game. For the professional establishment class, they just wanted to keep their position as a cog in a wheel. Even for, Republican women who wanted to make sure they could still go to the monthly Republican women's, luncheon at the country club. It was about being a part of it, being a part of that culture. And they threw ethics, morality, and civility, and even legality out the window. And once you're in that and you're defending that, it becomes really hard to pull back. Once you're in it, you just sort of dig in, and the tribalism sort of, takes root. And so for them, it's not about issues. As you know, you were asking, why would Ron DeSantis do this? Why are these people, why are these lawmakers and governors, and why is the party doing things that actually hurts their people? Because it's not about helping people.
The other story this week that has made the headlines is the food system across the world, which isn't ready for the climate crisis. And a lot of people have been talking about this. Noam Chomsky was interviewed about this and said it's a very dangerous time for humanity right now. This is as the world's farms produce only a handful of varieties of bananas, avocados, coffee, and other foods, leaving them more vulnerable to climate breakdown. And it's already threatening many of our favorite foods. In Asia, rice fields are being flooded with salt water. Cyclones have wiped out vanilla crops in Madagascar. In Central America, higher temperatures ripen coffee too quickly. There's a drought in sub-Saharan Africa that's withering chickpea crops. And also the rising ocean acidity is killing oysters and scallops in American waters. Now, this is climate change in action. You know, the climate crisis is underway. It's not a warning anymore. It's not something that's going to happen in a few years' time. You know, this is already happening here. In California, Ventura County is already warmed by 3.8 degrees. We're at a tipping point. And Biden this week has, told the oil producers to drill more because he's trying to bring down gas prices. Well, that's not great from a Democratic president, is it? That really kind of goes against all of his climate policies to drill more oil out of the ground. But fundamentally here, there's a wider issue about food supply, us taking food for granted, and how the climate crisis is going to affect us in so many ways, and food being maybe one of the first that we really see, aside from extreme weather events. Now, I recently saw Ron DeSantis when he was asked a question at a rare press conference about climate. He said, that's Democrat stuff. There really is a complete denial from Republicans that the climate crisis even exists. I mean, Donald Trump didn't even know what climate change was. He used to refer to it as clean air and clean water. He had no concept of what it really meant. I mean, if Trump comes back in 2024, which is likely, or DeSantis, or any of these characters, what's that going to mean for the planet? What's it going to mean for food supply? What's it going to mean for, energy costs? I mean, is there any Republican that is prepared to take this seriously?
At this point, I would say no. I think we're in serious trouble already. Over the course of the decades, when you had Al Gore talking about climate change, and then Republicans were against it. At that point, we didn't have as much information. I would say that Al Gore very much politicized the issue because he thought, well, I'll make this my own, and that way, I can win the presidency or whatever, and took it, and so he politicized that, which I think made it more difficult, rather than trying to do as much as possible on a bipartisan basis. Is it too late now? They're telling us it might be. And I don't have an answer for that. Is it affecting our food supply? I mean, look what happened to us during the pandemic with food in terms of how we had to change, or when it wasn't available. And that wasn't because of climate change, but there were, we found out, we learned about the hundreds of thousands of hogs in Iowa that were brutally, they weren't slaughtered. They were put in the big barns, the big rooms, and they turned up the heat and the steam so that they burned and died slowly with incredible horrific screams. I don't eat pork as a result of that. But the farmers during the pandemic couldn't move the hogs. They couldn't afford to do humane slaughter. They couldn't afford to feed the hogs. And so they were destroyed in the most inhumane, grotesque way possible. And that's just one story of how we handled it during the pandemic. So I don't have an answer for you. I could just tell you that we're not going to handle it very well at all. And maybe one answer, people say, well, go, maybe don't eat the meat, go to something you can feed more people with actual crops than if you're feeding the crops to the animals that you're eating. But as you mentioned, we're not going to have the crops. We're in trouble. And I don't have that answer. And if it is a DeSantis, if it's over, it's over, and then it won't matter who we blame, because we'll be in such trouble. That's a horrible answer from me. I realize that, but I haven't
that's
heard
why I
anybody
asked the
come up with a
question.
better one.
Well, because it's very important, isn't it? And it's almost as if, in America, energy has been taken for granted. I mean, I live in California and like hardly anyone has a solar panel, and yet the sun shines the whole time. And I'm like, wow, surely America could have been making solar panels 50 years ago as cheaply as, any other locally made commodity. And we could have been harnessing the power of the sun. And yet there's no appetite for it because
there will be gas prices being higher, energy prices being higher. This is how you get that appetite for it. We wait for a crisis and we blame whoever is the politician that we don't like. We blame everybody. And we sometimes leave it up to the politicians. Will people only do solar panels if you get a tax break? I mean, or we can all do solar panels.
But people don't even hang their washing out on a line. I mean,
no.
in England where it rains all the time, we have a culture of hanging washing out to dry and then running out when the rain starts and bringing it in. And yet there isn't a single washing line as far as the eye can see in America.
Yeah.
And that is very interesting to me because, it's cheaper. I mean, I had a neighbor who was using the dryer all the time. And I said, why do you use the dryer all the time? Because it's connected to gas. And she had no idea that it was a gas dryer as well as an electric dryer, that it required both. She had no concept that gas was a fossil fuel that was connected to her dryer. So there's obviously been this huge lack of education, whereas in obviously other countries, I know Trump talks about windmills all the time to mean wind turbines, but you only have to look to the Netherlands to see how they've made the windmill work very well for them because they know what's at stake and they have, that their attitude is, well, why would you need to spend money on this if you can use water or wind to kind of turn this and create energy? Like that's the thinking. But the thinking here, it's all about cheap gas, the big truck. I mean, the fact that Ford have come up with an electric F-150 is genius. But how many Americans, machismo Americans, are going to want to drive an electric version that doesn't make any noise? I mean,
what?
There's a lot of...
the big strong men in America that have those big, huge trucks, the gas guzzlers. When the man who steals their wife or girlfriend from them has the electric car, that's when they'll start doing one. When it becomes cool and masculine and tough and attractive to have an electric car instead of the gas guzzler. I don't mean to belittle the issue, but you're making some good points. Americans suck at this. We're horrible.
It's the culture that I'm so interested in because, I used to think coming from London that America and England were pretty much the same, because we speak a very similar language and we have similar interest in arts and culture and we watch the same movies. But the reality is that culturally, America being a continent on its own has never really needed to rely on anybody else. It has always done its own thing. And the climate change it doesn't recognize borders. Climate change doesn't recognize the fact that America is here and Canada is here and Mexico is here. It doesn't consider that. We are all in the same boat. And it's just a tragedy that China and America are the two most polluting countries on the planet, and neither seem to be that fussed about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's alarming. We could do better. I don't know why we aren't. I don't know what will trigger us to do better. You see on the news, these rivers and bodies of water, drying up in Colorado, in the western states of the United States. And it's alarming, but what can a single person do about it? What can one person do about it? Can companies do something about it? It would have to take everybody. I think if everybody started changing their lifestyle and living like they did in their salad days, where you conserve energy because you don't want to spend the money, you're not going to drive your car everywhere because it's expensive, and you're young and you're poor and you're starting out and you're saving, but that sort of thing. It has to be something catastrophic, like being poor or having to count your pennies to change the behavior of Americans.
But that's the attitude,
that's
isn't
sad.
it? This concept of collective responsibility. That other cultures in other countries are more, they take that on more naturally. You know, look at Ukraine. I mean, look at how people in Ukraine have mobilized to fight the Russian army. I mean, every man of every family is like, you know, sending his wife and kids away, and he's going out to take on the enemy and stand up for his territory.
And we can't even wear a mask for our neighbors. Yeah.
And we can't even wear a mask here without politicizing it and it becoming an issue and causing air rage. They just extended the mask mandate for air travel, incidentally, for another 2 weeks.
You know, I've mentioned I'm a cancer patient, so I am immune compromised, or I could be. I mean, I'm pretty healthy. I've worked very, very hard at recovery since my chemo radiation, and my scans are clear so far. But I'm considered immune compromised. So for me, to go into a store and I'm the only one wearing a mask because everybody's freedoms, it's insane to me. It's insane. People will hold the door for somebody else and they think they're just such a gentleman, but they won't wear a mask for you. It's insane.
Just finally on this, the collective responsibility is such, because I had this with a guy recently who I met, and he just was about to buy a new car, and he was a lawyer, he had plenty of money, and he was buying a gas guzzler, and I said, surely with everything we know now, you must buy electric. And he said, well, what difference does it make if I don't buy an electric car? Like, what? I'm only one person. And that attitude from an educated person, he couldn't understand that, you know, us all doing our bit is essential. So have the Democrats not made it clear enough that this is serious and these are the steps that you have to take? Almost a bit like, you know, the Defense Production Act, where like the government is having to insist that these companies make ventilators or, you know, PPE, or as they did under Trump and Biden. Would it not be better to kind of mobilize the country and say, this is an existential crisis. This is what you have to do. You cannot drive your car. You have to do electric, and we're going to help you lease an electric car. You can't run your AC anymore because that's also putting gas out. You know, people don't realize that natural gas is what it's called, is actually methane gas. It's a fossil fuel. There's nothing natural about it, really. So, you know, is education the issue? And should Democrats take that responsibility more seriously?
Well, everybody should take the responsibility more seriously, obviously. Democrats, just like Republicans, you know, politicians now are more and more following the media rather than the other way around. You would also need to have some industry that cares deeply about this to invest a lot of money into such an educational process. The things we tend to make priorities or know about are, you know, there's money behind it. There's always money behind it. Who's going to put the money behind something like this, even if it's the right and best and really the only thing we can do for the survival of the planet? So if there's no big money behind it, if somebody doesn't make a lot of money from this, not going to happen.
Also in the news this week, another police shooting. A black man face down on the ground was fatally shot in the back of the head by a Michigan police officer. The violent climax of a traffic stop, a brief foot chase, a struggle over a stun gun. According to videos of the incident that happened on April 4, they released the video on Wednesday. There was actually 4 videos, one from a dash cam from the police car, one from the body camera of the police officer, and then one from the passenger in the car who got out and filmed the event. He must have been terrified. And then finally some surveillance footage from nearby houses. This was a residential area. This was a traffic stop of a young man, tragically somebody who himself was a refugee, somebody who was, you know, escaping violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo and coming to America for a free life. And this young man, 26 years of age, his name is Patrick Loyola, and he was killed outside a house in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now, there's been protests and demonstrations about this in the last few days. Ben Crump, the attorney, is speaking on behalf of the family, demanding that the police officer be fired and his name released. I mean, we thought we'd heard it all with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin being prosecuted for effectively executing George Floyd. This is another white police officer executing a black man for a crime that certainly does not come anywhere close to the punishment. This was a traffic stop over a license plate not matching the vehicle. Why is it the case that here in America, time and time again, police officers feel that they have license to murder people for crimes that are worthy of maybe a $50 fine? I mean, why should a young black man with 2 kids, 4 siblings, why should he pay with his life for something like this? Why does it keep happening?
I think it's been happening for a long time, and they've gotten away with it, and we simply didn't know about it. I think they, would cover it up a lot. We wouldn't know about it. It's part of the culture within police departments, and this didn't happen in the Deep South, as you noted. This was in Michigan. So there's a culture there that all of the rest of us have been unaware of. People in the Black community have known about it, and this one was particularly egregious. And the fact that the cop, right before he did this, his camera suddenly went off. They were saying there was a glitch. Well, no. They know when to turn their cameras off. They know what they're about to do. And they are very emboldened by this. The thing that's changed, aside from Colin Kaepernick, I still can't pronounce his name. He took a knee. He took a lot of heat for that. But that was the start of awareness. Because I think, what I've noticed with this sort of thing, first of all, cell phone cameras have changed the world in this regard. And so this will eventually stop happening because these cops have to be caught. They have to be punished. They weren't getting caught before. And it was a hard time getting them punished. We're now in a situation where we're all seeing it. So for white America, it wasn't part of our life. It wasn't in front of us. We might not have had an opinion one way or the other on, cops killing blacks. You hear about this, they're killing young black men and women. It was in our peripheral. Cell phone technology has put it right in front of us, where you see it once, you see it again, you're like, wait, there's something going on here. There's no denying there's a problem. So that's what's happened in terms of white America becoming allies with Black America, who had this awareness that this was going on. They were fighting it. It was a tragedy. But they were doing it they were grieving this and trying to change it just within the Black community. And now they have allies. So at this point, any white American who wants to claim this isn't a problem or defend it, see, now you can't deny that you know it. There's no denying it. All you can do is say, I don't care, or I think it should happen more, or it's not my problem. Or you can say, America, we have a problem, and it's not just with this shouldn't be just with the Black community. So we're in that process now. This is a cop who clearly, even after everything that's happened with George Floyd, with others, he clearly still felt very safe, very emboldened. This was incredible what happened. I mean, literally a bullet to the back of the head to someone. I mean, it would not have happened to a white person. It wouldn't have happened to me.
Well, it's the same as the executions that have been happening in Bucha in Ukraine. The Russian military shooting people in the head and leaving them in the street for 2 weeks before they retreat.
This was done as a way to subdue him. He was struggling. He was fighting against the arrest, and there are things that police can do during to subdue the person. Because when he was caught, he started running and they caught him, and then he started fighting back. I'm not convinced that if English wasn't his native language, because they said, do you speak English? So this was something, they needed help subduing him, but you don't shoot somebody in the back of the head.
You don't, exactly. You don't murder somebody for that. And
you still do your job as a police
I've watched
officer.
The video multiple times, and when he pulls over, the Patrick pulls over. And so in that means that he's prepared to engage with the police officer. The fact that he actually pulled over. If he wanted a chase, he would have driven off in his car, but he didn't. So to me, that suggests that he is compliant. The first thing Patrick did was get out of the car and say, what did I do? What have I done? And the police officer, instead of de-escalating by saying, actually, you haven't done anything. It's just the registration doesn't match the vehicle. He said, get back in the car, get back in the car. And of course, this 26-year-old doesn't know why he's being asked to get back in the vehicle. That's the moment that the police officer was, could be charged with a dereliction of duty, because he didn't de-escalate anything. He didn't engage with this guy. Wearing the uniform, I assume, for a lot of people that want to join the police service, is about being an authority figure. And, being a white man in a uniform versus a black man in civilian clothing is really the power play that's at stake here. Is that what it is? Is it about like white men enjoying wearing a uniform? Is it just power?
I believe it is. And I think that we obviously have good cops. They want to protect their community. We have good black cops. We have good white cops. But there is a culture where some of this is made a little bit too easy. The fact that this cop turned off his camera, he knew what was going to happen. And the fact that this young black man, when he was told to get back in the car, and all of a sudden he pulled over, he got out, he said, what did I do? When things get weird and he's back in the car and then he's told to get it, that's when he's thinking, oh, I'm a black man in America now. This is what happens. He gets scared and he runs. And, you've heard people say, why'd you run? Why don't you just comply? And I don't think that any white person in America could claim that they know what it's like to be a black person, to be a young black man being pulled over by a white cop, knowing what we now know. And there's no excuse for it. It doesn't matter. I mean, like you said, this so-called crime, it was wrong license plates on the wrong car. If somebody did that, that's a crime. But not the kind of crime where you get shot in the back of your head. And again, I'm going to say premeditated, because the cop turned off his camera. It didn't just happen to coincidentally go off at that time. So again, I think cell phone technology, history is going to show when the tide started turning on this in this country in terms of public opinion and allies. And it's not going to be some great, big, wonderful speech that someone gave. It will be taking a knee. That will be the one thing. But it's going to be cell phone technology and everyday citizens saying, I'm going to capture this on camera. So, that's going to be what changes things. I am shocked that it's still happening, though.
In England, our police don't have guns. And I explain that to people here and they just can't understand it. I'm like, the criminals don't have guns. You can shoot someone in the
ankle. You can shoot someone in the foot. You can shoot someone in the arm.
Right.
You don't shoot him in the head.
Yeah. We had one shooting in England of an innocent person by a police officer. It was a young man by the name of Jean-Charles de Menezes, who was just taking the escalator down into the subway. And the police thought he was somebody else, and they killed him. And that is like the one that is in all of Britain's minds, because it was one. This is happening week after week. There are dozens of people, of black people, that have been executed by police officers. And I use the word execution on purpose, because to say shot doesn't mean anything. This is somebody with a family. And when you talk about black people making a run for it, they are literally running for their lives every time. Now, I've read that the police unions are a big part of this, because they seek to protect their police officers and they protect them from prosecution and they enable them to, keep their jobs and their pensions. I mean, is that somewhere that maybe the law needs to look at, these unions that are protecting officers when they commit such crimes?
Well, the unions play a great role in a lot of ways, but they should not have a say in this. I can see where they want to protect their officers, but again, we're not talking about an accident. We're not talking about, as you said, someone just being shot. Like I said, they could have disabled him, and if it got to the point, if it escalated to the point where they felt they needed to shoot him in order to subdue him, you don't do it in the head. I mean, I'm obviously not an expert at this, but anybody looking at this can see that this officer kind of knew what was going to be happening here, because that camera got turned off, and that's no coincidence. Luckily, other cameras caught this. So I don't know. I would think that this being, the bright light shining on these things, more and more people being aware of it and becoming more mainstream, meaning mainstream into white America, so that it's not just a Black community fighting this on their own. It's going to make it more and more difficult for officers to get away with this. And I think that would possibly reduce the power that the unions have to protect them from this sort of thing. And I think eventually you'll have other police officers speaking out and say, we know where the line should be drawn. Yes, there's going to be times when we have to use physical, harm people physically to subdue them or to capture them. But I mean, this is being shot in the head. There's no defense of this. None.
Okay. I'm sorry to end on such a sad note, but, this is a reality, isn't it? And this is, something that happens time and time again. And, it makes me think about the Carl Rittenhouse shooting from a few months ago, when he murdered two people in the street and got off on a self-defense charge. And, that is something else that we're starting to see, is that citizens, becoming militarized and weaponizing themselves to kind of do this work. And so if the police stop killing people, then, as is the case, there's several cases now of, Ahmaud Arbery, a lynching in broad daylight. But do you think it might be the case that the public would want to take on this role of, enjoying the pleasures of
I think we know the
people?
answer to that. This is in the era of Trump. That is what people want to do. They love their open carry. It makes them feel like big, strong men. A lot of these good old boys, these MAGA boys, the truckers that came to Hagerstown, Maryland at the Speedway that then went and drove around the Capitol, and they had their Confederate, I saw them on the Beltway, the Confederate flags, the Trump flags. And then, we knew that a lot of them were packing heat, as they say. They had guns. And they love this stuff. And so these all kind of go together. And so these guns are not for self-defense. You don't need to have, an assault rifle strapped to your back because you're going into Starbucks to get your, frappe. These are people who like the intimidation. They want to use those guns. These guns are now not about hunting, not about the Second Amendment, not about protecting your family. This is about intimidation. And they go out like Kyle Rittenhouse. That kid went out looking for it. And his mom knew it too. He was looking to do this. He wasn't going there, because he wanted to protect his grandparents' store or gas station, whatever it was. He went there with a gun with the intent to use it. And he did. And now he's become a hero of the right.
And so, yet again, I mean, every time we have these conversations and every week, I think I don't want to make it about white supremacy and racism again. That was last week's conversation. And yet here we are, Cheri, doing exactly the same thing, that a lot of this culturally comes back to white supremacy in America. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'm very, very grateful to you for your experience and your life experience, and well done on jumping ship from a Republican Party and
Thank you.
seeing the light. I do understand, how you feel. I sympathize with you, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you.
My thanks to Cheri Jacobus. Don't forget to subscribe to The Weekend Show on YouTube or as an audio podcast, and also the 5-Minute News Daily Podcast, which drops every morning so you can listen whilst you make your morning coffee. And leave an iTunes review if you can for both podcasts. I'm Anthony Davis. Do join me next Sunday morning with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5-Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.